I think something is seriously wrong with a beautiful system which develops this big, clumsy, aggressive government, huge corporations with more influence over their markets than is desirable from the standpoint of free competitive theory, trade unions, which at least according to some opinions have a similarly malignant influence on their markets. There must be something radically flawed with the capitalist system which allows these institutional developments. This doesn't alarm me because I'm a socialist, but I would readily...
There must be something radically wrong with the socialist philosophy which allows the extraordinary, the much worse developments that have occurred wherever there has been any real significant attempt to put a thoroughgoing socialism into practice.
Socialism is a word of many meanings.
No, I think we might easily get into a quite separate debate.
Right.
I think it's possible to note in passing that they may both be right, that conventional capitalism, conventional socialism as conceived in the 20th century are both wrong, and that the polarization of the debate between those simple two alternatives greatly impoverishes the real range of political economic choices which modern societies have.
But what has happened? Over and over again, one claim after another for the kind of socialism, this kind of socialism or that kind of socialism, has turned to ashes. And each time, the answer has come, oh, well, it was a wrong brand of socialism that was adopted, or the wrong people were running it.
But you're saying argument yourself, don't you?
No, I'm not.
The Federal Reserve in 1929 failed to do the right thing. It was the wrong brand of capitalism.
It was a wrong brand, absolutely, but what I'm saying is something different. I can at least point to examples in history of systems, of capitalist systems, in which the government had a fairly limited role. Not my ideal government. Many things doing many things I would not want to do. But I'm going to point to such examples of long stretches of history in which have been relatively successful, where the major achievements of humankind, not merely in economics, but in all other areas, have largely arisen. It is very difficult to point to any similar examples of where big government has achieved such success.
But you said before you didn't like to go back. You're now talking about going back.
No, I didn't say I didn't like to go back. What I said is going back or forward is irrelevant. What we want to do is the right thing wherever it comes from.
Because, as Bob Lukacsman said earlier, things have increased in scale, and the scale of business has increased. And you were saying just before, big government, big labor, big industry, big firms go together, and you didn't accept it before. When Bob said you accept it now from here.
No, I don't accept it. What I accept is that big government is a major factor promoting big labor and big capital. I did not accept that in the absence of big government, you would have the big capital and big labor that worries him.
You don't think the big capital arose before the government?
What are we doing here? No, I mean, defending big government is like defending death and taxes. When was the last time you met anybody who was in favor of big government?
Today I met Bob Lukacsman.
With discrimination.
Not per se. You're in favor of
I make a living by making distinctions, after all. Certainly not without qualification.
I'll help use the floor.
What I was going to say is, I think most of us are not in favor of big government as a theory. The question that keeps haunting me here is, how do you, going back to your question of just the monetary regulation, how do you make, and let's assume that you can really, we'll go a step further and we'll say, we'll go all the way with you, we will install that mechanism. What makes you think that when the storms arise, that the people running that mechanism are not going to misread just as they did in the past?
Because I'm going to have, if I had my way, I would have a mechanism which didn't require them to read anything.
In other words, simply a money formula.
Absolutely.
It is cranked out in relation to the GNP regardless.
The
Right.
question is, how are you going to keep them tampering with this black box? That you have a thing.
I'm not going to have a black box. I'm going to have a very visible system. I've written out, as you know,
I know.
developed at great length the precise details of what I would do.
It will calculate this, but then there's going to be someone who'll come in, the people that you dislike will say, but we could do it a little bit better by doing it this way or that way.
Of course.
How will you keep them from doing it?
Well, in the only way in which you can do it in a democratic society, by establishing both a written and an unwritten, and the unwritten is just as important as the written, an unwritten constitution on the part of the public at large an acceptance of the view that this is not what people in government ought to be doing.
That their sacred measure of...
Well, if you want, but not necessarily
Professor...
sacred in a theological sense.
No, but
unfair criticism. Professor Friedman says he's a bad doctor because people won't actually take his medicine. I mean, that is not fair, but it does seem to me, and I say it again, that to reduce the whole debate to one, are you in favour of big government or small government, as though that was the only interesting or important political economic choice we had to make, is very foolish.
That is very foolish.
And if you put it in that form, in practice in democratic societies, people will go on backing, supporting and paying for big government. Because unless you, in addition to pointing out the errors, defects, weaknesses, fallibilities and failures of government, you also describe in some detail and with some attraction the other changes that you're going to make in the non-governmental sector of the economy, which are going to give people the kind of protection, the kind of opportunities, the kind of fulfillment, the kind of stability, the kind of prosperity that they want. They are not going to buy it because you're offering them in a pig in a poke, and they will see it, whether or not you approve of the phrase or whether or not I approve of the phrase, as going back to something which they're glad to have got away from.
The question of how you draw the lines and where you draw the lines is a difficult one, and I can't see any possible way of somehow making a decision on that that will stand like the Rock of Gibraltar against all comers.
I don't think that the public is going to, nor should it, choose ideologically. I think it's going to favor and disfavor certain activities of government out of its experience, by its perception of what's good in its own interests and so on. And I don't preclude the possibility that there will be a different mixture of perceptions by the public, which will lead to a shift in the functions of government. But I think it's at least as possible that after the shift occurs, government will be perceived to have more functions as that it will have fewer functions.
It seems to me also that you could have the monetary policy that you're talking about and have the very big HEW, etc., and more easily.
Unfortunately, you're right.
Now, could you dilate on that?
No,
I meant it, seriously.
I agree with you. I agree with Nick. So these are separable issues. And Peter J. will agree with that, too. In fact, he and I are in almost complete agreement on the desirable monetary policy. Where we differ is on these other policies, and there is certainly no doubt that you could have an essentially automatic stabilizing monetary policy of the kind which I've suggested, of a fixed rate of monetary growth, no discretionary intervention for cyclical purposes, and at the same time have a very big government on HEW, have all sorts of regulation, have tariffs and all other things. With respect to Peter J.'s more general statement, it's impossible not to agree with his statement because it concentrates on objectives and not on means. And the real issue has to do with means. What are the most appropriate and effective means which will give people the greatest assurance? You can't give them certainty, but the greatest assurance that they will have a reasonably stable society with opportunity for themselves.
There we will end the discussion for this week, and we hope you'll join us again in the next edition of Free to Choose.
Of course.
Next week, does the government's welfare system really help the poor and needy, or is it a scandalous waste of taxpayers' money? Is HEW an instrument of a compassionate society, or is it the symptom of an over-governed bureaucratic jungle? Don't miss Part 4 of Free to Choose next week.